The next topic we're going to cover is employee motivation. And in this little video, I just want to explain one of the theories that we're going to cover. And it's a theory called equity theory. And before we get into the specifics of it, we just need to talk about a couple of basic concepts here. The ideas of inputs and outcomes. An input in a job is anything we contribute to the job or to the organization. So our behavior that we give to the organization, our time, our effort, our inputs. We bring knowledge, skills, and abilities to a job. Those are inputs. We're loyal, we're committed. Those are inputs. So anything we give to the job or give to the organization are inputs in the terminology of this theory. And we also can talk about outcomes, what we receive from a job or from the organization. What do we get out of our job? The most obvious outcome is money. That's an example of a tangible outcome. Other tangible outcomes are benefits. We might get health benefits or some child care reimbursement. We might get some kind of perks. We might get a company car or something like that. And we might also get intangible outcomes. We might get recognition from higher ups in the organization, or a lot of appreciation from our boss for work well done. But in any job, we put something into the job and we get some things out of the job. And the basic idea of this notion of equity theory, the word equity means equality or fairness, is that in a work setting, we look at and think about the ratio of our own inputs to outcomes. What am I putting into this job relative to what I'm getting out of it? And we compare that to some other person in the organization. What are they putting in the job, and what are they getting out of the job? And we want these to perceive that these two ratios are equitable. All right? And if we do perceive that, then we're generally happy and satisfied. But if we perceive that there's inequity between our own ratio and someone else's ratio, then we're motivated to do something, to make some changes. Let's look at an example. So imagine yourself in this situation. You and a coworker both started working for a company at about the same time. You both have a college degree, both do the same job, both receive the same salary. You try your best to attend work every day, even if you're not feeling well. While at work, you always try to work hard and do the best job you can. Your coworker, on the other hand, often misses work, claiming to be sick. When he's at work, he tries to avoid doing work as much as possible and spends a great deal of time socializing with other employees. When he actually does work, the quality and quantity of his work is lower than the quality and quantity of your work. When it's time for the company to distribute year-end bonuses, you discover that you and your coworker receive the exact same amount of a bonus. So let's look at this situation. Your outcomes are the same as your coworkers. You're both getting the same salary and you get the same bonus. But your inputs are different. You put more into the job than he does. You work more, you work harder, you do higher quality work. So in this situation, you would likely perceive inequity or unfairness. Specifically in the terminology of this theory, you would experience what's called underpayment inequity. This is where you would perceive that your ratio of inputs to outcomes, is worse or at a disadvantage to his. All right? You're both getting the same outcomes, but you're putting more in than he is. Your inputs are greater than his. So your ratio compared to his is worse. And the theory predicts that an employee in this situation is likely to be a little angry, and that you're going to be motivated to do something to restore equity, or the perception of equity in your mind. How might you do that? Well, you might act in some way to lower your inputs. You might not work as hard. You might not come to work as often. You might not be as loyal or be as committed. So you might do some things to reduce your inputs to try to make things fair. Or you might act in some way to raise your outcomes. You might try to get more out of your job. You might go to your boss and say, hey, I want a pay raise, or I want a company car, or I want some additional perks. You might try to get some additional outcomes. Let's look at another example. First part of this is the same. You and a coworker both started working for a company at the same time, both have a college degree, same job, same salary. You try your best to attend work every day. While at work, you work hard and do the best job you can. Your coworker, on the other hand, never misses work no matter what. In fact, he's usually the first one to arrive at the office in the morning and the last one to leave in the evening. He often voluntarily goes to the office on Saturdays to do extra work. You never go to the office on the weekends. In thinking about your coworker's job performance, you have to admit that the quality and quantity of his work is consistently higher than the quality and quantity of your work. When it's time for the company to distribute year-end bonuses, you discover that you and your coworker receive the exact same amount of a bonus. So what's going on in this situation? As with the previous situation, your outcomes are the same as your coworkers. You both get the same salary and the same bonus. But here you're likely to perceive that your coworker's inputs are higher than yours. He works harder, works more, does higher quality work. So in this situation, equity theory predicts that you would experience what's called overpayment inequity, where you would feel that your ratio of inputs to outcomes was better than his or more advantageous than his. So the theory here predicts that you're going to experience a little discomfort, probably in the way of guilt, and that this is going to motivate you to do something to restore equity between you and he. So now how might you restore equity? In this case, you might act to raise your inputs. You might work a little bit harder. You might be a little more conscientious and make sure you're upping your quality of your work. You might go to work a little earlier, stay a little later. You might go in on Saturday once in a while. All right? So you're going to raise your inputs. You might lower your outcomes. You might turn down a free trip or something that the company is offering, or turn down a company car that the company is offering to some people. So you, according to the theory, are going to be motivated to do some things to restore equity between you and your coworker. Now, as I always like to do, I want to tell you about a research study that presents some evidence that suggests that there is something to this notion of equity theory. And this is a research study by a guy named Greenberg, and it involves the status of offices in an organization. And so before I get into the study, I just real quickly want to mention what determines the status of an office. And these are the four main things. The size of an office. A bigger office is generally a higher status office. The location of an office plays a role in determining the status of an office. If you're in the basement next to the furnace room, that's a lower status office than if you're up on the higher floors near the executives. If you have a window, that's a sign of status in an office. And if you have really nice furnishings, that's a sign of a higher status office. So these are some of the things that determine the status of an office. Hang with me on this. You'll see how this is relevant in this research study in a second. But what I want you to keep in mind for now is that the status of an office that an employee has is an outcome in terms of equity theory. Right? It's something that they get from their job or that the organization gives them. The organization gives them space to work in, and it can be either high or low or moderate status office. So keep in mind that office status is an outcome. Now, here's the study this guy did. He was working or arranged with an insurance agency to do this study ahead of time. And this insurance company, the building they were in, was part of it was undergoing remodeling. And so this researcher, Greenberg, saw a neat opportunity to do a research study here. So a lot of the office space was being remodeled, and so employees were going to have to temporarily be moved to new offices in the same building, but just in a different part of the building. And so what this researcher did, as I say, working with the insurance company, he arranged for the people that needed to be reassigned temporarily to new offices to go to offices that had different degrees of status. So some of the people were randomly assigned to an office that was of equitable status, equitable to their regular office. Some people went to an office that was a slightly higher status office than their regular office. Some people temporarily went to an office that had much higher status. Some people went to an office that had a slightly lower status than their regular office. And some people went to an office that had a much lower status than their regular office. So just to repeat, these employees were temporarily reassigned to new offices, and the the status of the office that they were reassigned to was essentially the independent variable. Now this was what this experiment was what's called an ABA design. The A refers to baseline condition where some data are collected, and then the B refers to where something changed, and in our case that's when the people were reassigned temporarily to the offices. And then the A phase of the experiment refers to back to baseline again, when some data are collected. Now what data did they collect here at these three phases, the ABA phase? They collected a standard measure of insurance agents' work performance, and that's the number of cases, insurance cases, that they processed each week. So what this researcher did is 2 weeks before the employees moved, he measured how many cases they processed. The 2 weeks while they were temporarily in a different office, he measured how many cases they processed. And then after 2 weeks, they went back to their original offices, which were now remodeled, and he measured how many cases they processed. And just, I'll mention this because I'm going to show you a graph in a second. The previous 2 months, the average for all these employees was, average of the number of cases processed per week was 49 cases per week. All right, so let me show you this graph, and this is kind of neat, I think. So on this graph that we've got the vertical axis here, the number of cases processed, and on the horizontal axis here we've got time. So before they were moved to their temporary offices, the 2 weeks before, so this is the A period in our ABA design, and then the 2 weeks while they were in their temporary offices, that's the B phase, and then the A phase again, returning back to baseline. This is when the employees went back to their original offices, which, as I said, had now been remodeled. So I'm going to show you 5 lines on this graph, and these are the offices that the people had temporarily been reassigned to. And remember, I said a second ago that the average for the 2 months before of all these employees was 49 cases per week. Well, the people that were moved to an office of the same status that they normally were in, their job performance stayed right about where it was, didn't change. The people that got moved to a slightly higher status office, remember this middle section here is while they're in the new office, the temporary new office, their job performance went up a little bit. They processed more cases. The people that were assigned to the much higher status office, their performance went up even higher in those 2 weeks. Now, if you're hanging with me, you can probably guess what happened to the people that were assigned to the lower status offices. These are the people that were assigned to an office that was slightly lower status than their regular office. During that time, while they were in those offices, their job performance went down. What about the people that were assigned to a much lower status office? Their job performance went down even further. Now notice that after they were sent back to their original offices, their job performance all went back to essentially normal. But what's happening here? Well, a good way to interpret this is in terms of equity theory. These people who went to the slightly higher or the much higher status office, they, for this temporary period, had their outcomes increased. The organization was giving them more. They were giving them this nice office. Well, how can they restore equity? They look around, they say, not everybody has this nice office, so what do? They work a little bit harder. Conversely, what do these people do? Hey, I've lost something. My outcomes have been reduced. I've been put in this dumpy little office. All right, I look around, I see some other people have nice offices. How can I restore equity in my mind? I'm not going to work as hard. I'm not going to produce as much. So these data, I think, are really neat in terms of interpreting them in terms of equity theory, where the people had their outcomes changed. Some people got higher outcomes for a temporary amount of time, and they worked harder. Some people had their outcomes reduced, and as a result, their productivity went down. So I think this is an interesting study. I think the whole idea of equity theory is interesting. I hope this video made a little bit of sense for you. We'll recap it real briefly in class next time.